Welcome to Real Rockford Files, for tales of the paranormal, supernatural, and the flat-out unbelievable. Today I'm going to be sharing a compilation of aliens and UFO stories. Let's get into it. Story 1. So I have no idea if anything that's been happening to me is real or not, but the only person I talk to about it is my girlfriend, and I just want to see if anyone else is having similar experiences. I've seen a bunch of UFOs throughout my life. Once when I was 13, and every other time I've seen it was between 2022 and now. The first one was when me, my friend, and his parents were all coming out of the house to go somewhere on central Hatchie, Georgia, and I saw a red orb slowly make its way across the sky very high up, and then another followed, and another. It was about 30 of them in a line going across the sky. None of us knew what they were, and that was the first time I ever saw anything. The second time was a dream. I'm pretty sure when I was younger that I saw a craft laying in my backyard. A very tall being, gray, with a huge head that had a weird symbol on it. Walked right up to me, said, "We haven't spoken in ages," in a very friendly tone, then stuck his 9-inch finger up my nose and down my throat. And I woke up. That's all I remember from that. But for some reason my mind remembers that vividly. I'm not sure why. These other times have been recent. For about the last 6 or 7 months, me and my girlfriend were outside, seeing if we could project our thoughts to these beings that were out there and just see if anything happens. We sat outside for about 30 minutes, asking with our minds and hearts truly to see them and just see their crafts, to show us they were real and here. We saw a star start moving, and it just went across the sky. Then 2 more appeared randomly, went across the sky right in our line of vision, and we watched them disappear as well. I came outside alone for the next few nights because it made me obsessed, knowing they heard us and showed us. I continued to see them any time I asked, so I started telling my son about them, and he wanted to see their ships too. He's 10, about to be 11. We were sitting out there. I explained to him how to contact them and how to ask. So we started doing this, and of course, 1 or 2 stars started moving around the sky, and he thought that was cool, but out of nowhere, me and him both looked into the same spot at the same time for whatever reason, and it looked like a white flash of light, or like a white hole opened up for a second, and this was the whitest light I've ever seen in my entire life. Me and him both jumped up and started freaking out because of what had just happened. It was obvious it was something that doesn't naturally happen, and I honestly believe they showed my son so he would know I'm not crazy, so I thanked them. The next time, I was going to sleep and started feeling like I was having an anxiety attack, but the worst anxiety attack I've ever felt, like my adrenaline was pumping really hard, and I kept getting scared, but I didn't understand why. I closed my eyes at one point during, and I could still see my room, but there were 2 beings at the end of my bed that looked like children looking up at me on a field trip. I couldn't move at all. It felt like one was behind me, standing inside the wall behind my bed with its hand on my head, communicating but using emotions and my own thoughts to tell me to calm down, but it was like I was telling myself to calm down, and that they had to pull my astral body out to go with them. But I couldn't calm down, and they were coming. So I felt like either I was having bad sleep paralysis while awake, or they were actually here. I regret not calming down to this day because I really feel like I could have gone with them, but I haven't seen them again. This next part is just to inform you what happened and why I think what I saw may have been real. Not long ago, just last year, my girlfriend's uncle came to spend time with her family on Thanksgiving and had to use our bedroom as a guest room. While we were in the back room, laying down for a nap, I was thinking about how we were broke and I really wanted $20 for some weed, and telling her how I hope her uncle gives us some kind of money because he was rich. While we were laying down, I was in the state that's right before sleep, but your mind is still awake. and I saw from a very close perspective her uncle's hand reach down and drop a $20 bill on the ground in our room, under some clothes. Immediately I told her I just saw that and wondered if it could be true, because we needed it. About 3 days later, he left, and we got our room back. When we came in the room, I went straight to the spot I saw in my vision, picked up the clothes, and a $20 bill was sitting there. Me and my girlfriend both freaked out because it was crazy that I saw it happen, and now I've realized I can remote view, but have no idea how to control it. It just randomly happens. The reason I was telling you that story was so you can understand this next story. This just happened about 3 weeks ago. I was doing the same thing, laying down in the process of going to sleep, and what looked like the same kind of portal that Doctor Strange uses with no sparks, just the circle, opened up, and I could see a group of about 6 beings standing there looking at some kind of screen. One noticed me, and they all turned and looked at me like they were confused how I was seeing them. They were vividly white, wearing some kind of doctor coats, and looked like a mix of person and praying mantis, but their skin was pretty much glowing white, and I only seen them for around 2 or 3 seconds, so I have no idea if that was real or it was just my mind playing tricks on me, and I'd like to see if anyone else has seen anything similar to the grays or the really tall white praying mantis looking ones. It all sounds crazy, I know, and that's why I haven't told many people. I do not know if this is just me imagining things or if it's really happening and I'm seeing extra-dimensional beings. Story 2. So, kind of a short story, but back in 1995, in high school, I was out camping, fishing all night with a few buddies at a farm pond. Now, people who know me and them wouldn't believe it, but no alcohol was involved. So anyways, during the night, which was absolutely clear, and since we were in rural Kansas, there wasn't any light pollution, we were watching satellites moving across the sky and also seeing some meteors falling, one of which was close enough it was greenish blue. You could see the smoke off of it and hear the sound it made. Pretty damn cool, if I'd say so. Well, as night went on, we seen one satellite that was moving in a totally different direction of all the others, and it was brighter than all the stars or satellites we had been seeing. Same size, just brighter. Then all of a sudden, it stopped. Did not move at all. That's when I said something to my buddies, and they also said they were watching it too, but didn't want to say anything because it was so weird. Well, after what seemed to be about 30-45 seconds of it being stationary, we seen what I can best describe as white photon things shoot out all around it, like 5 or 6 in total. Then the satellite shot to the right, then to the left, and disappeared in tremendous speed. We all have no clue what we seen, and still will talk about it to anyone who listens to this day. Now, growing up in rural Kansas, we seen many things that were strange, but could always come up with some idea what it was. But this, nah, we have no clue. Cool nonetheless. Story 3. My father's encounter. So this story takes place in the 70s in Daniels Park, Colorado, which is located just south of the Denver metropolitan area. Daniels Park has a lot of history behind it. There's a part of the actual park itself that is haunted by a woman who was murdered there decades ago. There's also a story where there's a building that had an attic which was haunted by a depressed girl who lived there years ago, and you would still hear her crying to this day. But the crazy part of the story is that the girl was still alive in the present day and was currently an old woman living elsewhere. So a lot of experts would say this is a great example of residual haunting. As for this last story, it was a story I read about 20 years ago, so if it was true, the old lady is probably dead by now. Another thing that Daniels Park was known for was having a lot of UFO sightings back in the 70s. Daniels Park is now populated with a lot of upper middle class gated off communities and a lot of high-end country clubs and golf courses, but back in the 70s it was considered the boonies, just miles and miles of dirt roads, fields, and rolling hills. So anyways, back in the early to mid 70s, my father was in his early teens. One night he was hanging out with his older teenage sister and her boyfriend at the time. They were all three driving down a dirt road with a barbed wire fence on each side. My father was in the back seat. His sister was in the passenger seat and her boyfriend was driving. In the far distance, they saw something dark reddish walking in the field towards the road. As they got closer to where it would eventually be crossing the road, they stopped to see what was going on. It walked like a human and looked like a human. Before you know it, it literally walked right through the barbed wire fence. My father always mentioned how he felt completely frozen and unable to move as it approached the car. It walked around the front of the car to the doors and windows on the driver's side. Once it was about 3 feet away, it bent over to look inside the vehicle to get a better look. At that point, it just turned around and began to walk right off. Right when that happened, it was as if time just unfroze, and all of a sudden his sister's boyfriend punched the gas and took off. As they accelerated away, my father looked back and saw it just continue across the road, walked right through the other barbed wire fence, and continued on its path into the field. As they continued to drive forward, they saw some bright lights on top of the hill that the road eventually led to. They were so startled and frazzled up from the first thing they saw, whatever this was going to be, they didn't want to find out. Instead, they turned around and sped off back the same direction they came from. My father thinks it was a UFO. Once they passed the spot where they had their first encounter, he said it was as if nothing ever happened. There was no sign of that entity they saw earlier. Going back to when it was right outside the vehicle and it was looking in, my father said it was very human-like, but its face was like a glowing dark red, and you were able to see through its skin and see the brains, blood vessels, and all the other organs. So with this being said, I've always had a strong interest in the paranormal, and out of all the research I've done, I've never heard anyone describing an alien encounter looking like the one my father believes he saw. When I was a kid, I always wanted to hear him tell the story, but after one incident when I convinced him to tell the story to a guest we had, they completely doubted him and tried to make a complete ass out of him in front of me. My father finally told me to not bring that up in front of people ever again, and in the future he'll decide if he thinks it's right or appropriate to share it. As for his sister, my mom and I never really liked any of his siblings, so we never talked to her. From what I've always heard, she never wanted to talk about it afterwards. My father thinks he saw an alien, and the bright lights up the road was a UFO ship. So I just wanted to share and ask if anyone else had a similar experience with such an entity, or if you guys know what it could have been. Story 4. This is a family story I've heard only twice. I can't remember how it was brought up the first time, but the explanation was very vague, so I asked again a few months later when the family had come together at the cottage during the summer. They seemed kind of iffy talking about it, but provided more details. They live in Ukraine, but took a trip to Turkey sometime in the 90s. They had rented a little cottage there that was far enough into the countryside to be considered fairly remote. Long story short, one evening the dogs outside started going absolutely crazy, barking viciously and just overall behaving erratically. One of them, my grandma's brother, I believe, went outside to check what was going on and saw what they can only describe as a UFO nearing their cottage. Pretty high up in the sky, but lowering a bit as it came closer. He called for the rest of the family to come and see, and to this day they can still confirm what they saw. Well, the ones that are still alive at least. They said it was a triangle shaped and it had 3 lights, one in each corner. When it got seriously close to the house, they really began to panic and ran back inside. The very walls were shaking, dishes were breaking from the force of the vibrations going through the walls and floor, and the dogs outside were barking louder than ever. It hovered over the cottage for several minutes before ascending back up and disappearing. These are all people who are very conservative and rational, and they hate discussions regarding the supernatural, so I have no doubt in my mind that they were telling the truth. Story 5. When I was about 12, my best friends and I, used to sleep out on my friend's trampoline in his yard in the summer. We would gather our bed stuff and bounce around until we got tired, then eventually lay down and go to sleep. One evening, 4 of us were laying on the trampoline talking when we noticed that there's something floating over the woods nearby. You couldn't see it directly, just that it blocked the stars out as it slowly moved. It was just a little higher than the treetops and completely silent. We were just some dumb kids, so we just watched it. Slowly it drifted until it was directly over the top of us. Then suddenly there was this light that I cannot describe. It was more than blindingly bright. It was disorienting and cripplingly bright light shone down into you. The next thing I remember, we were all standing inside my friend's house, looking out his sliding glass back door at the object still hovering there, and then it glided away. We were all spooked, but we decided to go back out to go to bed on the trampoline. We're laying there for a while, and the next thing we know, it comes back again and does the exact same thing. Again, we find ourselves inside looking out the back door. Beyond all reason, we go back outside to bed again. Same thing happens again. We finally decided to sleep inside with the lights on. My friends and I lost touch as we grew up, but when I was 18, I heard one of them was in town. I ran into him at a party one night and pulled him to the side to ask him about that night, as it had bothered me for some time. His response has shaken me to this day. I cannot describe his reaction sufficiently. He looked at the ground and said, "I don't want to talk about it." I was kind of shocked by his response, so I didn't know what to say. He got up and walked out, and I stayed sitting there thinking about what just happened. I got up after a minute to go see if I could find him, but he'd left immediately after. That was it. Haven't seen him or the others. But his response was enough to let me know something strange definitely went down that night. I don't know if I want to remember. Story 6. This is a story of my father's. It happened in 1982 while my father was stationed on a military base in New Brunswick. One night my father's best friend and his girlfriend left just after dark to go see Tron at a movie theater. About an hour later, the friend and his girlfriend were back on the base. The car pulled in, and my father immediately noticed that it was damaged pretty badly and covered in several different colors of paint. My father asked them what had happened, why they had not gone to the movie. They brushed him off and went to bed. A few days later, my father got his friend to tell him what had happened. They were driving along a stretch of highway and they noticed lights coming from over a hill just ahead, where no light should be because there was nothing around for miles. Just at the base of that hill was a parking lot for a park. A bunch of cars were pulling into the parking lot to investigate the lights, so my father's friend pulled in too. Everyone got out of their cars and was about to start hiking to the top of the hill when a large disc with flashing lights rose above the hill's peak and emitted a loud, strange sound. Several cars got banged up, and everyone's panicked to get away, thus the transfer of paint. My father's friend drove back to the base as fast as possible. A few days later, men in black suits showed up on the base looking for people. They talked to my father's friend and then sent him on his way. My father asked him what the men wanted to see him for. The men told the friend that he'd better shut up, say nothing about anything that happened if he wanted to keep his military career. So, that was the end of that. Story 7. As a kid back in the 80s, I was spending the night at my aunt and uncle's house, which was out in the sticks in Tennessee. I was sleeping on the couch and woke up due to a bright light coming through the kitchen window and into the living room. I was looking towards the light, which was white and slightly flickering. After about 10 minutes, I turned my head, as it was now keeping me awake. After a few minutes, I turned my head back towards the light and was about to go to sleep on the love seat. I see a tall, dark figure standing between myself and the light. I was frozen and could not move or scream. It approached me, reached out and began tapping on my forehead with what felt like a nail or something pointed. This went on another minute until I must have fallen asleep or was put to sleep. I woke up the next morning to a quiet house. I go into the bathroom and I have a red spot on my forehead and the skin was slightly broken, but no blood. Story 8. This was about 40 years ago. We were camping in the summer in the woods behind a friend's house. About 11 p.m., we had to walk back to the house for something. It was a full moon, and there was plenty of light, so we didn't take flashlights. We went out of the woods and down a long lane that went along an open pasture between the woods and the house. We got what we needed and started to walk back. The moon was behind us over our right shoulder. We could see our shadows on the ground ahead of us from the moon. As we were walking, we saw a black circle with no lights. It just looked like a black hole in the sky. It was very low above the trees and moving towards us slowly. We all stopped, 4 of us, and watched it. It came over the trees and over the pasture, and then suddenly you could see a shadow moving on the ground where the moonlight was, giving the thing a shadow just like us. And it went from the northwest to the southeast and passed over us and kept going until we couldn't see it anymore. It lasted about 2 minutes. It did not make any noise. It did not look like anything, just a perfectly round black circle. They had no lights, and moonlight did not reflect off of it. It made a shadow that was about the size of a house. I don't know how high it was. It had no detail, but it seemed very low, like a couple of 100 feet. We told our parents the next day, but no one believed us. This was in Ohio in 1982 or 83. Story 9. When I was in my early 20s, in the 2000s, it was the summertime, and me and my brother, who was a few years younger than me, were hanging out. And for some reason, I can't explain to this day, we both just decided to go outside on the back porch. And we both went outside, and immediately we looked up and saw the most unbelievable thing ever. It was a ship the size of a football field, shaped like one, a giant rectangle with a light on each corner, and it was just slowly going over our house. We live in Rockford, Illinois, and in the middle of the city. You figure everybody would see this thing, but it turns out not a lot of people look up. It wasn't on the news, nobody landed, but me and my brother both swear to this day we saw what we saw. Story 1. On a weekend trip to Boulder, Colorado in 1969, a young member of the Air Force was in bed when his motel room suddenly darkened, followed by a bright flash of light. The next day, he realized his half-inch long hair was almost 2 inches long now, a mystery that his roommate totally freaked out about when he returned to the base in Aurora, Colorado. He wasn't sure what to think of my story, but did realize there was glaring physical evidence, the airman recalled. Though he didn't remember anything else from that night, he speculated in his report that he had been abducted and presumably taken to a place where time passes more quickly than it does on Earth. I still have trouble remembering many things, as it has always been very foggy since that time, he said. Story 2. At about 10 p.m. one summer night in 1971, 2 teenage girls crept from their house in Sunnyvale, California, and met up for a neighborhood stroll. All was still and silent for an hour or so, until they came upon a 20 to 30 foot flying ship hovering as low as the streetlights, probably a full 5-minute walk ahead of them. Friends watched it drift towards some nearby apartment buildings and appear to survey them, bobbing slightly up and down. It had these great enormous arms on the sides that slowly swiveled around, and they had lines on the ends like ropes, but they weren't ropes, one of the friends explained in her report. It didn't make noise or light up, and it looked more like wood than metal. She got the impression it was collecting things, though she couldn't see what was inside. The girls fled in terror when the aircraft suddenly turned its attention on them, and they tried in vain to convince the one friend's father that they had seen something truly extraordinary. He dismissed it and said it was probably just a weather balloon. The witness wrote, "If I am sure of anything, It is that this thing was no weather balloon. Story 3, 1979. From his front step in Wenatchee, Washington, a man watched a silver triangular aircraft with no discernible fuselage, no wings or other protruding control devices coast slowly over the tops of 150-foot tall poplar trees. A jetliner could not have stayed airborne at such a slow rate of speed, he recalled, and this was significantly larger than a Boeing 747. There wasn't much time to wonder about the physics that kept the craft in flight, because it was drifting straight toward Birch Mountain. My immediate thought was that a monstrous crash was imminent, the witness explained, but it never came to pass. Instead, the UFO just disappeared. The NUFORC actually vouched for this particular onlooker. One of two excellent reports from the same witness. They wrote in a note below his report, "We know this witness and have spoken with him on several occasions. He formerly served in the U.S. military and held a high security clearance." Story 4. A man in Leicester, England, awoke one night in 1982 to find a soft light illuminating his room. It was coming from the face of a 4-foot tall gray creature that resembled the classic aliens from 1977's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. The witness, overwhelmed with a feeling of calm and peace, pinched himself several times to make sure he wasn't simply dreaming and scanned the room in vain for some other explanation. Knowing he'd have a tough time convincing anyone he was telling the truth, he nudged his wife awake so she could bear witness too. But as soon as she stirred, the room went completely black and the visitor vanished. "Did I imagine or dream the whole thing?" he wrote in his report. "Absolutely 1,000,000%. Nope." Story 5. 3 friends were on their way home from an INXS concert in Pittsburgh when they encountered a ball of light sweeping a very bright beam of light over the dark road and its surroundings. They promptly pulled over, and 2 of them exited the car so they could get a better look. The third friend remained in the car, screaming. Though the light resembled a helicopter search beam, there was no hint of any craft or body emitting the beam, even when it faced away from us. Furthermore, the whole scene was completely silent. They quickly returned to the car when the beam drew closer, and it suddenly darted away and disappeared into the night. When they resumed their journey, the radio played static before cutting out completely. We heard a commenter say, "Further evidence that there is life on Mars," and then it went back to static, the witness reported. Story 6. Late one evening in 1991, a young man and his girlfriend parked the car in a peaceful spot overlooking the port of Olympia, Washington, and passed about half an hour talking about life and random things. Suddenly, what they thought was one abnormally bright star split into a sphere comprising roughly 20 points of light, much like a Hoberman sphere expands. I found out many years later what a Hoberman sphere is, and just about crapped myself the first time I saw one in motion. Its movements looked so similar, the witness noted. And it rotated rapidly before contracting back into a single bright light. That light then glowed red and spit out 5 identical red lights, one by one, which pulsated in a synchronized manner as they flew through the sky in a straight line and eventually vanished. The witness actually managed to capture video footage of the event, but the camera only showed a blank screen with a few strange flickering whitish dots on it that seemed to come and go. I am, after seeing it, hard-pressed to believe it to be anything of known terrestrial technology, he wrote. I have resigned to the likelihood that I will never know what it was at all. Story 7. On March 15, 1995, the NUFORC received an influx of calls across several states from witnesses who saw a bright object flying across the night sky. The first of these so-called Ides of March sightings was reported by 2 men in Florida, who described it as luminous, white, and disc-shaped, though subsequent descriptions from others varied. A Tennessee caller thought it was more of a blue-green cloud of light that emitted sparks before vanishing. And a Missouri State Highway Patrol sergeant said it was a green light that turned yellow and suddenly snuffed out, like a light being switched off. He also explained that many people called the patrol's 911 dispatch line to report their own sightings, and one person claimed his cell phone and car radio both died when the UFO got close. Other reports came from Virginia, West Virginia, and Missouri. In summary, it appears that one or more egg-shaped objects radiating intensely bright green, blue-green, and yellow light, and periodically spewing out clouds of sparks, streaked over at least 7 states, stopping from time to time, and the whole event occurred in a matter of minutes. Story 8. 3 foresters were planting seedlings in Washington's mountains when a gently wobbly disc-shaped aircraft appeared and drifted toward a herd of elk. Nearly all the animals fled together, but one set off in a different direction. The UFO positioned itself over the lone elk and beamed it right off the ground. Though the observers couldn't discern any visible means of support attached to it, the UFO wobbled more, seemingly struggling with the weight of its prey. It eventually rose so high that the witnesses couldn't see it anymore. They assumed the elk had somehow ended up inside the craft. When NUFORC Director Peter Davenport traveled to Washington to conduct an investigation, he was shown the carcass of a pregnant elk that had been found dead just a few miles from the UFO sighting. As for whether that was the same sorry creature that the UFO had supposedly targeted, we'll almost definitely never know. Story 9. Shortly after 4 a.m. one morning in January 2000, Ed Barton, a police officer in Lebanon, Illinois, heard a dispatch about a strange UFO sighting at a neighboring police station. He looked up and saw the object for himself. 2 extraordinarily bright lights that seemed to merge into one even brighter light. He sped off in the object's direction until it was almost overhead, and ballparked its altitude somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 feet. It was triangular, with a light on each corner and many more along one end. The object abruptly shot through the sky so fast that Barton concluded it couldn't possibly have been created by humans. Other Illinois residents witnessed it too. A Millstrat police officer named Craig Stevens thought it was between 1 and 2 stories tall, and perhaps 3 stories long. Highland resident Melvern Knoll also likened it to a house. There were big windows, about 2.5 feet wide and 5 or 6 feet high, 2 stories, one on top of each other, he told the St. Louis Post-Dispatch in 2010. I still believe it was something from another planet, though a spokesman for the nearby Scott Air Force Base is said to have claimed that the base's radar had been shut off at that time, and nobody had seen the UFO. Other reports allege that the government was involved. The NUFORC received one report from a highly reliable source, who said that Air National Guard jets may have been scrambled to take a look at the object. Several other people even told the NUFORC that federal government employees visited police departments and citizen witnesses to ask that they curtail all their statements to the press. Story 10. This one is my own true account. Between myself and my family, we've had quite a few UFO sightings to share, so I'll try to cover a few, starting with the oldest sighting. In 1965-67, my dad was between 8 and 10 years old at the time and was walking home from St. James School in Belvidere, Illinois. When he was about a block away from home, he saw a silver disc in the sky, your classic flying saucer. He told me it was really low, only 20 to 50 feet above the tree line in the direction of Belvidere Park, at least as large as an 18-wheeler, maybe bigger. He was stunned for a few seconds, which is understandable, then ran inside to tell his mom there's a flying saucer outside. She either didn't believe him or didn't hear him. but either way, he immediately ran back outside, and it was already gone. Fast forward 30 years or so, and I'm the same age my dad was as his sighting, and at this time he had never told me the story. I'm the third oldest of 7 brothers. We had recently moved to a trailer park in Belvedere on Spring Creek Road, which was a 5-minute drive from where my dad saw a UFO. Well, one day, my brothers, our friends, and I were out in the big empty field next to the park playing baseball, when I just happened to look up and saw a silver disc hanging in the air between a few clouds on a mostly clear day. It was pretty high up, as high as the clouds, but was so clearly not a plane, not a helicopter, perfectly round and big. I didn't know anything about UFOs at the time, so I kept it to myself. It sat there the entire 20 minutes to 40 minutes it took us to finish our game, and at that time it inched its way towards a cloud that was drifting nearby and didn't come back out. It wasn't until another 30 years or later that me and my dad would exchange these stories. I almost get the feeling we saw the same thing years apart, but if it's not, it's still cool. I wouldn't have another strange sighting for another 5 to 7 years. So I'm 16 years old, it's the year 2000, we were living in Rockford, Illinois, and my mom had to drive somewhere at night, so I rode with her. On the way back from our drive, we were driving north on a road just off of Kishwaukee Street, within a few blocks of an old junk store that I'm not sure if it's there anymore, but this location is important because of the direction of the Rockford O'Hare Airport is to it. The airport is south of that location, so it was common to see planes looking really low when they were coming in for a landing. Well, this night, I saw a plane above the houses pointing in the direction of the airport, and it didn't look like it was moving. After a few seconds, I told my mom to stop the car. There wasn't any other traffic, so we stopped right in the middle of the road. I immediately opened my door and started getting out as I told my mom what we were stopping for. We both got out and looked at this plane. This huge plane wasn't moving at all. We stood there and stared at it for a couple of minutes, occasionally glancing at each other with the look of, what the hell is happening, all over our faces. Just as strange as the plane not moving, it didn't make a sound. It was an eerily quiet night. Being that we weren't driving 100% legal in our current vehicle, we couldn't stick around. We grudgingly got back in the car and went home to tell everyone. It being the year 2000, it would be a good 6 years until I get my first cell phone, and years after that to get my first camera phone. Haven't seen anything like that since. Hope you enjoyed. Story 1. This literally just happened to me this morning. I was sleeping in bed next to my wife and son. My son is just over a year old and still wakes up throughout the night. So my wife and I have lullabies playing on YouTube on our TV all night to help soothe him when he wakes up. As normal, he wakes up and starts fussing, and my wife pulls him in to breastfeed. She taps me and tells me she has to use the bathroom, so she gets up and does her thing. Keep in mind, I'm not drowsy or sleepy or anything at this point. I've been awake for at least 45 minutes, even prior to my son waking up. Anyways, as she's in the bathroom, I'm laying there, my son on the other side of the bed, now back asleep. Then suddenly I feel paralyzed. I feel as if my body weighs 500 pounds. The sound of the lullaby disappears and is replaced with what I can only describe as rushing winds, as if I'm being shot through a tunnel or a vortex or something. My eyes are wide open, I'm fully conscious. I feel a heavy presence in the room. I hear whispers, but I can't understand anything they're saying, and it's so loud. The wind or water rushing or whatever the heck it is. I was frantically trying to turn over and move, but it felt like I was being held down. I felt the pain in my lower back, but I couldn't scream or talk or yell or even whisper. Then I freaking saw it, right there in front of my bedroom door. A silhouette, but not a dark one, as if it was invisible or trying to be invisible, but somehow the light from the TV reflected off of it. 7 feet tall, slender, almost oval-shaped head standing there staring. All of this felt like it lasted hours. Then just as I caught the glimpse of it, my wife opened the bathroom door and I was free and it was gone. I haven't told my wife yet. She's very religious and I just honestly don't want to freak her out. But it happened. This is not a made-up story. This literally just happened to me. I've had sleep paralysis before and this was nothing like it. I was wide awake. I feel weird telling this story, but I'm hoping just putting my thoughts into words can help me better understand what just happened. Was it an alien? I don't know. Could it have been just a freak incident? Sure. Whatever it was, I've never experienced anything like it. Story 2. I used to have dreams, and eventually conversations as I was falling asleep with them. They looked like the Greys, but with a lighter, almost luminescent skin tone. The short version is that they would show me pictures of the universe, explain the different dimensions of perception. They also informed me that the Greys were not good and had no love at all for humanity. Towards the end of these dreams or interactions, they insisted on teaching me how to mentally defend myself from the Greys and any other telepathic aliens, as they put it. They claimed it was imperative that I master this skill to the point where it would be a reflex. After they were satisfied with that, they told me that I would not hear from them again for a long time due to the interactions being a beacon to other telepathic types. This is the very first time I've shared this story anywhere at all. Overactive imagination? Maybe. Am I crazy? Not clinically. I saw a therapist in my late teenage years and he was adamant that I wasn't schizophrenic or anything else like that. This was due to other things, not this experience. I hear voices and see things, but the therapist said schizophrenic hallucinations don't really compare to what I have going on. But that's a completely different sub-story. Just crazy dreams caused by all the alien stuff in the media back then, maybe so. It honestly felt like it was a real interaction with an intelligence separate from my own. What are your thoughts? Story 3. My father passed away from dementia and heart issues at the age of 78 in January. Years before the dementia was diagnosed, my dad, who typical of his generation, never cried, but came to me crying and told me the story of his abduction. He said it was the real cause of his PTSD and swore me to secrecy, which I kept until he passed. He'd told me the story a dozen times since, always with the exact same details, nothing ever changed. Even the small details were exactly the same, and when he was close to death with Lewy body Parkinson's dementia. My dad was in the Air Force between 1963 and 66. The story he told was that while he was in the military and stationed in Germany, he was abducted and put in some kind of underground facility for about a week. The story goes that there were giant 7 to 8 foot tall humanoid people. He called them Nephilim, forcing him and other soldiers there to do some menial tasks, and they would observe him. He would joke that he'd make mistakes on purpose just to screw with them. He was stripped of his clothing except his underwear. He kept doing this day after day. He was offered the compensation of women of his choice, but he said no, and they didn't force him to. After about a week, something happened and he was rescued. He said the thick steel doors were blown open, and in came a huge amount of some kind of military in unique uniforms with unique weapons, but were human. They got his clothing and wallet back to him and told him to go back to his barracks. He said he went back to the barracks and nobody ever asked him what happened. No questions at all, except an order to never tell anyone about it. He never told his wife 67 years until a month before he died. She knew he had PTSD, but no idea why. When Mom and I compared stories, the details were exactly the same. Even though he had advanced stage dementia, at that time communicating was very difficult, yet he got the whole story out. About that time, I went to stay with my dad's brother for 2 weeks to help take care of him after getting out of the hospital. I mentioned the story to my uncle, who also was in the Air Force the same time as my father, and he already knew the story. He knew the story identical to what I'd been told. Said Dad told him back in the 1960s. He truly believed it happened exactly as my dad described it because my dad didn't make up stories, didn't lie, and wasn't one to believe in BS. My uncle added stories of his own, but not abduction related. I honestly never believed Dad, especially once diagnosed with dementia. I just assumed it was all part of a big dementia-fueled delusion. But my uncle knew this story from the 60s. Dad had told him the story back then, way before his dementia. So I wonder, could it have really happened? Another thing, the last 2 years of his life, he was obsessed with watching any and every alien movie he could find. He told me it was because he was searching for anything similar to what he experienced, so he could show me what he went through. I don't know. We knew he had dementia at that point, but he tried so hard to get us to understand. Has anyone heard something similar? Story 4. When I was 10, I was living in a small town in Maine. I had went outside with my dog during the day, late summer, early fall. As we're walking to a tree in my backyard, she starts barking like crazy up at the sky, and all the trees start blowing in a strong breeze. The next thing I remember is darkness all around and flashing lights in the sky as me and my dog are walking back into my house. My mom's roommate was angry with me and asked where I'd been for so long. I told her what I could recall. She yelled at me for lying and sent me to my room. I had mostly forgotten about this until a friend of mine told me what happened to her uncle on an island on the river. A group of them had set up camp for the night and all opened a beer. It was dark, around 10:30. Next thing they knew, they had all stopped and looked at each other. It was 3 a.m. and no one could remember what they had been talking about. Their beers were warm and undrank. Has anyone else had something like this happen? Story 5. Been having a weird week. I woke up Wednesday morning around 4 a.m. with another nosebleed. Not so strange, I've been waking up with them since I was a kid. But then the following Friday, this morning, instead of waking up with another nosebleed, I woke up with a very odd alteration. So I had cut my index finger last night while making dinner. I wrapped it tight with the last Band-Aid I had in my Band-Aid box, and this morning I woke up around 2:30 a.m. to find the Band-Aid was now wrapped around my middle finger. My cut index finger was still cut, but now unwrapped, and the Band-Aid now mysteriously sitting on my middle finger. The Band-Aid was perfectly intact, one of those hydrocolloid bandages wrapped tight like it hadn't been reused or tampered with. If you've used these types of bandages, you know that they don't stay together well if you unstick or open them and try to reuse them. I've been scratching my head, and the only thing that makes sense is that I must have been visited, and if so, how the heck did they mix that up? Story 6. So when I was about 2, I had this memory that's fuzzy but vivid in the sense that I know it wasn't a dream. I got up in the middle of the night to get a snack, and then I got to an open doorway and get to the kitchen. I remember seeing this mantis thing that took up the whole doorway in terms of height. I was so horrified I froze in fear, and when I blinked it was gone. I ran and curled up in the recliner to make myself as small as possible and fell asleep there. My mom found me. Years later, I'm talking to my mom, and she said she found me in that chair a few times. I only have the memory of the very last time. Anyway, I always blew it off as a hallucination. It wasn't until recently I seen an alien movie where there was a crudely drawn picture of aliens like the Greys that everyone knows about. I seen a praying mantis looking one and nearly choked, so I googled it, and there's few people with this experience. I'm thinking it wasn't a hallucination. Now, I don't think I'm special in any way, and I still didn't just immediately go, oh, it was an alien, but my mom and I were talking, and she mentioned that when she was pregnant with me, she saw these floating colorful lights in her room one night. She said they were trying to tell her something, but when I asked what, she said, no clue, I just wanted them to get away from me. She had swatted at them like they were flies and tried to literally shoo them away. Now these conversations were us talking about hallucinations we've had, not aliens, but I'm kind of starting to think these aren't a coincidence, and maybe there's something more going on here. Does anyone have more info on mantis aliens and how they might be related to the floating lights, or why it happened when I was so little? Story 7. So I know this might be met with a ton of speculation as this topic overwhelmingly receives. However, it is a true and raw experience that I've only reiterated to a few of my closest friends and husband. It is midwinter 2013. I was out with friends about 10 miles from my home at their apartment and stayed up late with them till about 2 a.m. It is important to note that I had taken an afternoon nap that day leading up to these events from about 3 to 5 p.m. and we did not do anything other than smoke some weed and drink a little. At the time, being 20 and having started dabbling at 17, it wasn't anything out of the ordinary to have a few drinks or a few puffs. Basically, I had a hefty tolerance and wasn't seeing stuff. I was not out of my mind is what I'm trying to say. In fact, more towards the realm of sober when the following took place. I left my friend's house after napping on her couch from 2 a.m. to just before 5 a.m. I left her house 15 minutes from mine just before 5 a.m. I was totally sober and just wanted to get home to my comfort zone. So I drove sober. My parents owned a home in a lake community, so when I drove in on a back entrance road, it's one of the main roads, they're all back entrance in the country, I immediately was stirred in my usual go with the motions to a large black and oval shape in the distance over the lake. The road I was on is a hill that connects down to a road that spans the circumference of the lake community, so as I turned down onto the circumferential road, I saw this ship as I described it hovering about 100 feet off the lake through the tree line. It's winter in New England, so you see everything. As I turned right onto this road, it began following me at a speed along the road as it traveled. My parents' road was a sharp right off to it, so I gunned it going about 60 in a 25-mile-an-hour zone because I felt an immediate feeling of needing to get out of there. And I remember repeatedly to myself, I'm going home. This is not happening. You will not take me. I'm going home. In a panic. I just sensed an ominous feeling that this was otherworldly. Let me be clear, I've never had an encounter or experience such as this before. I made it home with no issue, but remember after I repeated that about 3 to 5 times, the thing disappeared from sight and I just hauled it the last quarter of a mile home and raced to my room. I remember looking out my bedroom window, which had a slight view of the lake during the winter, which it was, and seeing no evidence of the thing that just essentially chased me. Ever since, I've had other instances of awareness. No one believes me, but I'm as steadfast in the belief as the sky is blue, the grass is green, and personally, that God is real. Anyone else had something like this happen? They seen something that looked like that? Story 8. This one is a personal account of mine. We were hanging out, me and a couple of family members, my dad and a few brothers included, in my mom's bedroom, which is off of the living room. And we see to the east is where the window is facing. I can't remember who noticed it first, but our attention was drawn over to this red dot in the sky. When we look up, it's nighttime, and all of a sudden a couple other red dots start to appear. And this was years before drones were everywhere and people were always doing drone shows. So we weren't thinking, oh, it could be a drone. We're looking at the red dots in the sky and they're all offset and they look pretty far away. Then all of a sudden at once, every single one of them moved at the same time and created a straight line at a 45-degree angle, like it was pointing up at something at the sky or they were pointing down at something on the ground. And I grabbed my laptop and was running outside trying to get the camera going at the same time, thinking I gotta get this on tape. Falling over broken trees in the backyard. When I finally get up to the fence and turn my laptop around to get the camera pointed at it, they all blinked out one by one and just disappeared. It was really weird. A lot of us saw it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed. Story 1. So I had these older HTC One phones that had cracked screens but still worked fine. I was not using them as a main phone. I would play with them and try to figure out what I can do with them. So I found out about an app that can make your device like a security camera. I realized if I turned on the infrared mode on the app, It really was seen in the dark very well, too well. Those old phones you could use as remote controllers, so I think maybe that's why. I've used the app on many other phones and did not get the same clear night vision I would get with the HTC ones. Anyways, I find UFOs fascinating and was watching a couple of videos about how you can see some UFOs with infrared. I remember the HTC phone and I'm like, oh my god, I want to set up a little sky watch thing. So I charge up the phone, dig around, find a glass bowl to cover the phone and protect it. I go outside and turn on the security cam. The cam was using the front camera of my phone and the phone was still in my hand. So I see myself and my house behind me, and that's when I see it practically right over my house. A triangle UFO with rounded corners, an orb thing on the underside in the middle of each of those corners, and one orb thing in the underside right in the middle. I looked in shock, and before my brain could register to hit record, the thing shoots off, and I just stood there like, whoa, what the F was that watching me? I've had a couple of other weird moments with UFOs, but this was the most profound. I could see the shape, the detail, and it took off so fast. There were no trees in the way. When it moved, all you could see was the sky above my house. It kind of freaked me out, and I went inside and did not keep my phone out to look at the sky. Funny enough, I have real security cameras that see infrared now, but I've never seen anything like it since then. Story 1. This is an experience that happened over a year ago, and it's been a mystery to me ever since. Any information explaining what possibly could have happened would be greatly appreciated. This is in New South Wales, Australia. I was at my aunt's holiday house inn for the weekend. It was just a regular night, a little bit wet, but everything was normal. So it was around 11:40 p.m. and my dog was sleeping on my bed. And he quickly got up, started barking his head off to go outside. So I let him. This is unusual behavior for my dog. He runs to the other side of the backyard, which is about 15 meters away from the porch, and then stops barking. He was silent. I turned around for 2 seconds to look at my mom, who had just come out to see what was going on. I turned back around and my dog was just sitting in front of me on the porch like nothing happened. I don't know how he ran back so fast without me noticing. Anyway, here's the interesting bit. Me and my mom hear this loud buzzing sound, not like an electric sparking sound, nothing natural like we've ever heard before, and a bright lime green light came shining directly down, lighting up the whole backyard perfectly like a precise laser scan. And it happened twice. Shine and buzzing, pause, shine and buzzing, stop. There was a roof over the back porch, so I couldn't look up to see where it had come from. My instant thought was aliens. The whole thing was so bizarre, like nothing I'd ever heard or seen ever before. It started as a deep buzz to a higher pitched buzz and back to a deep buzz with the green light as the buzzing happening, and then the whole thing stopped. Then my dog slowly crept inside and went back onto my bed and was whimpering. The light couldn't have been from a power line because there would have been a shadow casting from the roof of the house, and sparks don't give off green light anyway, especially not as bright and neon as what we saw. Can someone please respond and explain, or tell me if anyone has had similar experience to mine? Thank you. Story 3. Last week I had this memory flooding back to my mind. I was a child under 7 years old who went to Mexico to visit my dad's side of the family. He had grown up in San Luis in the middle of nowhere. By the mountain, I just remember there was only being sand and dirt, no grass, and a bunch of cactus everywhere. Very desert looking. Anyways, when we got there, it was already late, so we went to sleep. We didn't all fit on the bed, so me and the other kids laid on a cot on the cement floor. Everyone had already fallen asleep, but I was little and in an unfamiliar place, so I was still up and couldn't sleep, and I was staring at the bottom of the door because there was an open space and I could see outside, and it scared me. Then I started to see a bright, blinding white light. There was a strong wind and dirt going everywhere, and the door opens and the light is so bright I could barely open my eyes to see, but I looked up to see 2 gray aliens with big black eyes standing at the doorway, and I got scared and I hurried up and I put my head back down and closed my eyes. I could feel them moving around at the top of my head, but I couldn't feel anything, so it was weird, and I just kept my eyes closed and the light started to fade away, and the wind started to die back down. So I opened my eyes again, and the door was closed, and they were gone. As a grown-up, I thought maybe it was just a dream, but it couldn't be, because I remember the next day when I woke up during the day, I kept hearing something rolling around in my head. So I kept shaking my head and could hear something in there. I even remembered telling my mom to put her ear to my head and shaking my head and asking her if she could hear it too. She just said, "No, I can't hear anything. Go play." I'm 28 now, and I told my dad, and he believed me, which was crazy to me because he's so serious and strict, but he believed me and said his dad used to see them out there all the time, and that they had huge black eyes, and that over there they used to look like balls of light or orbs of light, which made me think of the story of soldiers who shot down a UFO, and 3 gray aliens with big eyes emerged into a sphere of light and turned the soldiers into limestone. It just stood out because both were gray aliens with big eyes that could turn into balls of light. Story 4. I would like to talk more with you on this. I recently had an encounter that I know is something. I am living outdoors with my wife in Nevada, and we recently stayed with some friends in a tunnel, or as they call it here, a wash. Inside this tunnel, it is pitch black with no light. The first few nights were good, got used to the sounds and space. Then my wife was sleeping, and I was up when I noticed I could see a red hue on some of the walls and ceiling. Figured it was just me adjusting still. The nights went on, and now the more I focused on it, I started to see details, black lines like tile or stained glass in 2 of the areas. Brought it up to our friends that had been living there for years, and they acted surprised, not about what I saw, but more like that I could see this, but would not talk about it. As the nights go on, I started to feel contact in our bed, only under the covers, like snakes or tentacles. At first it was slight rubbing against legs. If I looked under, nothing was there. Then it would start again, wrapping around my body with a comforting heat. This went on for days, like it was either getting used to me or getting me used to it. Then one night I was relaxing and interacting with it like normal, fell asleep to awaken to a paralyzed state. This did not scare me. I was in a relaxed state. I could see and feel a sensation of it going in my body and adjusting or modifying my spine. There was no pain at all, very fluid movements as it did something, and then I was waking up the next morning like normal. Now as the nights progress, I start seeing images in the darkness other than the red. I would see girls' faces, figures, walls that were transparent, but this all took focus or it would not be seen. I have a physical marking on 3 or 4 vertebrae on my spine. My wife has this marking also now, but she did not know it was happening or will not admit it. Sorry for the long story, but I am looking for help about this. There's much more, and even now to this day things are different. We no longer stay in that tunnel, but I still have contact with the entity almost every night. Please let me know if you have any light to be shed on this. No, I do not use drugs or medication that can cause hallucinations. What can this be? Story 5. On Sunday, July 18, 2021, I was in my backyard with my mom, and I wanted to test out the brand new telescope I just recently bought. It was finally a clear night, so I began setting it up and adjusting the lens and whatnot. After suffering for a few minutes, I was finally able to align my telescope with the moon, and I was proceeded to admire all the glorious details on the moon's surface and how bright it was that night. I called my mom over to come look at the moon through the small lens. She said she wanted to see Jupiter, but I told her that it might take me a while since I was still trying to figure out how the telescope works. As I'm readjusting the position of the tripod, a weird feeling comes over me. It felt the same way as when you're walking around in public and someone keeps staring at you, and it's almost as if the stare from their eyes is burning into the back of your head. My instincts told me to turn around, so that's exactly what I did. As soon as I turned around, I noticed a very large orange glowing orb just chilling in the sky about a block away from my house. As I stood there in disbelief, my mind was trying to convince me that it's probably a plane or a helicopter, but all logical reasoning was thrown out the window when the glowing orb began to move in a bizarre zigzag motion. By the way, this all happened within a matter of like 10 seconds or less. The exact moment when I whipped my head around to look at it, I saw that it became frightened, because I noticed it floating there just watching me. It freaked out and started zigzagging around, and in seconds it shot away at the speed of light, gone without a single sound. To be honest, if I had blinked during any of this, I probably would have missed it. I started panicking a little bit because I was so confused, couldn't believe what I had just witnessed. I had so many questions. What was that? Why was it watching me? If it was extraterrestrial beings, what were they planning to do? Every time I think about this experience, it gives me chills, but it also makes me very curious to find out more about what I saw that strange summer night. Story 6. I've struggled with the idea of sharing my experience, mostly because I don't know if it actually happened or if it was just a dream. One night in the summer, when I was about 10 or 11, I was awake in the middle of the night, and I could hear the horses running around the pasture as if something had happened. I decided to get up and go check on things. At that time, my family had a massive old barn, and we lived in the middle of nowhere. I walked through the door of the barn and found a very large man, as white as snow, climbing into the hayloft. I remember being startled, but not scared. He turned around and looked at me, and slowly lowered himself back down. He took a few steps towards before he knelt down and put out his hand like one would do with a stray animal. As I looked at him, I felt like he looked sad and tired, and not at all like he would do any harm to me. I decided to take his hand and walk him towards our kids' hangout space, which was just a space in the barn where we had some old couches, a few toys, and a radio. As soon as he saw the radio, he became more animated, ran towards it and started messing around with it. That went on for a bit, and I kept asking him what he needed the radio for. He never said a word, not one word. He wouldn't give me a name, so I started calling him Radio. After some time, he sat the radio down and sat on the couch. I brought over my favorite horse book and started thumbing through the pages, showing him all my favorite horse breeds. Eventually, he gently took the book from me and closed it as if to say, "I'm done." I got up to put the book away, and he laid down on the couch. I remember him being so large that his head was on the armrest, while his legs hung over the other armrest, at the knee. He was a giant, pure white, and I don't recall any hair. His eyes were jet black, but they weren't huge or angular. If anything, they just slanted downward and were beady. After he fell asleep, I decided to go back in the house and go to bed, but I put a blanket over him before I went in. I woke up in the morning, and the whole experience came flooding back to me. My feet were dirty as if I had been outside during the night. I grabbed some snacks and ran out to the barn. I ran to our hangout space and found everything as I would have expected it. The blanket was on the floor, the book was sitting on the table, the radio was out of place, but he was gone. It's important to know that I had a habit of sleepwalking at this time in my life, so it's possible that this was all just a dream. At first I thought he was just a very, very strange person, and I hoped he found safety. The memory never left me, and by the time I had turned into a teen, I decided that I dreamed the whole thing and let it go. Then Prometheus came out, and I agreed to go see it with friends. When the tall white alien came on the screen, I nearly jumped out of my seat. It wasn't an exact likeness, but it was like seeing a ghost. At the time, I knew absolutely nothing about aliens, and the only one I had ever heard of was the classic Little Green Men. Nonetheless, I forced myself to let it go and move on. That memory could not be real, so I must have dreamt it. As time passed, I started wondering how I could have imagined a being that I had never heard of. Could that have really happened? Could radio be real? Has anyone else had an experience like this? Story 7. This is one of my own personal accounts, and a short one. It was the summer of 2011. Me and my girlfriend were driving to Belvedere, Illinois from Rockford to go hang out at her house and eat some pizza. She was driving and I was on the passenger side, and we're coming into Belvedere, just passing a building that builds cars. I can't remember if it's a Chrysler building or one of the others. But I look up in the sky because I see what looks like a ball of fire coming down from the sky. Like your classic, here comes a meteor ready to destroy us. I immediately freak out and I start pointing at it and saying, "Oh my God, do you see that? What the hell is that?" She looks at it too and is like, "Oh my God." We're both staring at it, wondering what the heck this is, why nobody ever reported a meteor falling today. And as we're watching it, it suddenly stops. And almost, if you would have blinked, you would have missed it. It just disappeared and reappeared in the same spot, but wasn't burning ball of fire anymore. It looked just like a regular airplane flying through the sky, blinking lights and everything. I don't know if it's some kind of cloaking thing or if there was an alien changing its form, but it was really weird. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed. I would like to take a moment to point out that a majority of my viewers are not subscribed. If you could be so kind as to subscribe, click like, leave a comment, maybe even share the video, it will go a long way in helping me get recommended. And if you would like to join my Patreon, you'll find a link in the description below. For $5 a month, you'll have access to all my content before it goes to YouTube. That goes for stories and my newest edition, short episodes of my mini haunting series. Now, let's get back to the stories. Story 1. It was the year 2021 or 2022, and I was living with my dad in Rockford, Illinois, just west of 11th Street on 7th Avenue. My mother passed away 5 years plus prior, and it was just the two of us. Where we lived at the time, our garbage pickup day was Wednesday. So one Tuesday, I was talking to my dad about getting the garbage out to the road, because the next day was garbage day. I then decided to put it off till the last minute, and told him I'll take it out before I head to bed. Went into my room completely by accident, fell asleep forgetting to take out the trash. When I woke up, it was already late in the afternoon, around 5 or 6 p.m. By the time I made it to the living room where my dad sat, just past the kitchen area, I noticed the garbage and said out loud, "Oh crap, I didn't get the garbage out, now it's too late." As I rechecked the time on my phone, that's when I noticed next to the time was the date, and the day of the week said Thursday. Immediately alarm bells are going off in my head screaming, "I've been abducted." I didn't panic, I just calmly said to my dad, "Did you know it's Thursday?" He looked at me like he wasn't getting my meaning, so I repeated, "Today is Thursday." His eyebrows crinkled up. "But yesterday was Tuesday," he said. We talked it over for a while. We were both positive we're missing one entire day. I think we were abducted, but your guess is as good as mine. Story 2. So last year I experienced something that was absolutely strange. I just keep coming back to it, thinking about what this could have been, and I can't get it out of my head. I read the text conversation of my fiancée from that night, saved on my phone, and my text as it was happening, describing what I'm hearing and seeing, and it was just so vivid and real I couldn't believe it. It was about midnight one night, and I was in my room at my parents' house. There are 2 windows in this room, one facing the backyard and one facing the side of the neighbor's house, and I'll be referencing to the one facing the backyard. This night, my blinds were shut and the overhead light in the room was on. All of a sudden, this big blue beam of light comes rushing in through the shut blinds of the window, making a swooshing noise as it comes in. This light was bright blue. I'm talking LED blue, bright as day, even with the room lights on and the blinds shut. I'm terrified, feeling like I cannot move from my bed, and as quick as it swooshes in, it swooshes back out. I hear rustling, almost raking of leaves after the light is left, and the world is silent otherwise. I could not explain this as anything human or man-made. This light was not a headlight. It could not have made it through my shut blinds, over the fence, and up to the 2nd floor of our house. The story does not end here. 2 weeks later, to the day, at around the same time, the same thing happened. Same bright blue beam and same swooshing and raking. I told myself I would get up and see what it is this time, but I was in shock as it was happening again, and once again I could not move. My biggest regret to this day is not looking out my window either of the nights. If anyone has any insight in this experience, I would be grateful. I'd like answers for something to make me feel a little more sane. Story 3. As far as I can remember, I've always been able to see things. One specific encounter stays in my head. I was about 7, 8 years old. I shared a room with my older sister, and we both slept on a full-size bed that was gifted to us. I slept against the wall because she was older and said I could fall to the floor if I slept on the other end. We always went to bed around 8:30 p.m. on school nights, and my parents always left our bedroom door open. It must have been during September or October because it was quite cool. One night, I was awoken by what sounded like footsteps. I felt pressure on the bed as if someone put their knee down on it because I felt my sister roll down. The only problem is that I wasn't able to open my eyes or turn away from the wall. In my head, I told myself to turn around, and something responded back in my head, "Don't look at me." This conversation went on for what seemed like minutes before I finally was able to gather up the courage to turn around. As I turned to see this being, it was now holding my sister up in its arms, trying to lift her out of our bed. I gasped and pushed my little body back up against the wall. This thing laid my sister back down ever so gently and put its long pale finger up to its non-existent mouth and said, "Shh." I wanted to scream. I wanted to yell for my dad to come help us, but nothing could come out of my mouth. I started to cry without any sound, and right as this thing began to lift my sister up again, I let out the most blood-curdling scream. "Dad! Dad! There's something in my room!" This thing stared so angrily at me and dropped my sister back down. It must have been about 3 to 4 feet in height and was wearing what I could only remember describing it as like an underwater swimsuit that Scooby-Doo wore in one of his episodes. This thing tiptoed out of our room and disappeared up through our ceiling right before my dad came charging in. I was terrified. I wasn't able to ever speak about this incident until a couple of years ago. My whole life I thought it was a ghost. It was only when my husband suggested it might be an alien when I told him that its arms were insect-like and it walked funny. Story 4. My boyfriend and I had planned a camping trip in Canton, Oklahoma for October 27th to 28th, 2018. We got to our campsite late in the afternoon and started to set up like usual. Unload the truck, set up the tent, set up our chairs around the fire pit ring, and pile the firewood up. I was really excited for the fire later because we had bought a huge log that had one of those holes through the center and soaked with some sort of long burning solution. We got all of our comfy stuff tossed in the tent. We set up our lights and speaker, hung out around the fire ring listening to music and talking until the sun went down. Then my boyfriend started a fire with the single giant log I was so excited about. As we were sitting in front of the fire, the sun completely down at this point, the speaker started to mess up. It was a weird, loud, glitchy static that happened several times, which I had never heard it do before. We figured that maybe it was because the internet was spotty, or maybe the speaker was too far from the phone it was connected to. So my boyfriend went to check it out on more than one occasion and couldn't figure out what the problem might be because we had okay cell service. It started to creep me out, and maybe him as well, but he never said a thing, even if it did. To change it up, we decided to just leave it alone and ignore the glitchy static and go open the Fritos and bean dip we brought and crack some glow sticks at the table. This is where everything ended. I dipped 1 or 2 Fritos in the bean dip, opened a pack of glow sticks, and sitting across from me at the picnic table, my boyfriend opened one of the glow stick packs that you make into glasses. He put the connector piece in his nose like it was oxygen tubes. I remember it so clearly. I remember laughing really hard and saying, "Oh my God, get that out of your nose." And the very next thing I remember was waking up in the tent. I was in a sleeping bag, nearly all the way zipped up, and my boyfriend next to me asking if I'd unzip the sleeping bag and share it with him because he was freezing. And that's when we both sort of snapped out of our sleepy daze and looked at each other so unbelievably confused and honestly really, really scared. So we sat there confused and sort of lost for words. So I said, "What the F happened? Why are we in here? How did we get in here?" I didn't know what to say or think, and my boyfriend looked just as confused and scared, and he shook his head in confusion, and it was all over his face too, just shocked and scared. Then he said, "I don't know. I have no idea what the F happened. I just woke up a few seconds before you. I was just lying here flat on my back with no pillows and blankets or nothing," which for him is weird because he sleeps with a million pillows. We sat there and talked through what all we had done and what we last remembered. We remember the very exact same moment of him putting that connector in his nose like a breathing tube and laughing our ass off. I was really freaked out and kinda hesitant to leave the tent. I've never in my life felt so confused. So we laid back down and he wrapped his arms around me and we kept going over what happened and how it was so weird that it didn't feel like we'd been sleeping on the ground all night. It's pretty typical to wake up from a night in a tent feeling a little achy. So after a while of talking and nothing making sense, I was ready to finally leave the tent. So I started looking around for my jeans and couldn't find them. So I said, where the hell are my jeans?" This is not unusual for me to sleep in only a t-shirt, but didn't explain where they were. And all of a sudden, I had a really scary flash of the night that I could clearly remember. I was sitting at the picnic table, he was squatted in front of me, and I was panicked and crying hard and really scared. I was putting giant stickers or thorn things from my jeans. And in this memory, my boyfriend was trying to calm me down and comfort me and said, "It's okay, babe, you gotta grab them just like this." This very clear memory was like a slap in the face. It had to have been no more than a 15-second memory. So I tried to explain what just came to me to my boyfriend, and he said, "I don't remember that at all. Maybe it was a dream." It made me a little irritated because it was so clear and I knew for sure that it happened. So he said he'd run out to the truck to grab my bag with clothes in it. I looked out the tent door flap and saw my shoes side by side set there all nice, not flung to the side like I normally do. But when I looked at my shoes, my right shoe's lace were covered in those giant thorn sticker things. So I yelled, "Babe, it did happen. It wasn't a dream." And I said again exactly what he said in my memory, and it came back to him too. He remembered exactly and clearly. When he came back to the tent, he had already looked even more freaked out and said, "Your jeans were folded nicely on your seat in the truck. You really need to come out here." So I got dressed and stepped out of the tent, and the first thing I noticed is everything was left exactly the same as I remembered it on the picnic table. There was a single Frito in the bean dip, the pile of glow sticks I never broke still in place, and the pack my boyfriend opened with the little plastic connector piece he had put in his nose right on the table with the other parts. All of our firewood was burned. We had a lot of firewood. It was really silent that morning. We walked to the bathroom, and in doing so, we noticed again that all the surrounding lawns were beautifully manicured. So where did the stickers come from? What the hell happened? How is this even possible? One thing my boyfriend noticed that was not normal for him was that he had no pain when he woke up. He was 82nd Airborne Infantry paratrooper and wakes up with leg and back pain daily. So I guess that's the silver lining. Were we abducted, running from something? Why can't we remember anything? We both believe in alien life but aren't sure if this is what we think it is. Thoughts? I've always been so afraid of the dark, and even more so now, and will never tent camp again. Neither of us have had any other memories come back to us, and I almost wonder if it's better that way. I'm not looking for answers. I just thought I'd finally share this. Story 5. My sister and I were sleeping one night and I was woken up. I don't know by what, but I was able to wake my sister up as well. The room was dark, but I distinctly remember seeing two soldiers, like decorated generals, at the side of our bed, similar to drawings of Pleiadian aliens. Once I woke my sister up, a portal opened up on my side of the bed, along with a vessel that we hopped into, in a track. My sister and I both woke up remembering this experience, and we still do to this day. I can remember it all. She says she remembers them being extremely kind and saying stuff like, "Let's go have fun," just really warm, inviting and everything. We went into the vessel, which was like a ride. I just remember it being like the Peter Pan ride, or It's a Small World ride. And then the ride was over. I don't remember much more. I always used to look down at the ground in amusement park rides to know if they were real. I don't know why I did that, but I remember looking down at the ground and it was so real and detailed. I can't remember much about the ride, but it was bright and vivid with flowers, etc. I live very close to NASA and have seen the TR-3B. Never had any more experiences like that afterwards, but yeah, thought I'd get some insight on what you guys think this might have been. Story 6. My parents' house has this weird light anomaly. I've seen it once, but it scared the crap out of me and I've never seen it since. It was in 2013. I was coming home with my mom from a football game, and she took my neighbor from up the road home first, and then we were coming back down and pulled in our driveway, and the whole right side of our yard was lit up like my dad's truck headlights were on, and we could see the inside of the cab like he had left the door open. Like you could clearly tell that's his truck and the inside lights are on and the headlights. And I was like, "Where's Dad going this late?" And my mom said, "Probably to your Nana's." She lived on the same road. Literally pull up 5 feet and it's gone. And my dad's truck wasn't even parked there. He was in the shower. He'd moved his truck hours beforehand. So anyway, my dad still randomly sees it. It wakes him up from the light shining in his bedroom window. Last night he woke up, went to his window, checked his phone to see what time it was. He said it lasted for almost a minute, but he checked the time so he could check his security cameras in the morning. The camera facing that side of the house skipped a full minute when it happened, and none of the other cameras did, and they're all wired to the same recorder. And also forgot, probably 8 miles away in my first house with my husband, I woke up in the middle of the night because there was a large green light shining outside of our house, and I wake my husband up. He sees the light in a hazy sleep, and it's gone. He immediately goes outside to check if someone's out there, and nothing. Story 7. When I was a kid back in the 80s, my mom, my brothers, and I were driving from Oregon to New Mexico. It was the middle of the night when a sign had us take a detour into the desert. We drove for a long time, and my mom had to stop to sleep in the middle of nowhere. I was sitting in the front chatting with my mom, and my brothers were asleep in the back seat. All of a sudden, the area became as bright as day. The next thing I knew, we were back on the highway. For years, I thought it was a weird memory, but I mentioned it to my mom a couple of years ago, and she said she had the exact same memory. I don't recall any ships or strange aliens other than the bright light and time loss. Story 8. I don't know where else to go with this right now. I'll explain what just happened, and if anyone else has experienced something similar, please let me know. So I was sitting in my living room, watching Netflix alone. My Netflix suddenly stopped working. It came up with the little loading 51% circle thing. My aircon turned off, and then I heard a beep noise, and these two big flashes of light came from either side of my living room, and the kitchen from outside through the blinds, and I suddenly couldn't hear anything. The best way to explain it was like my head was in a microwave, and it was just deafening silence. I tried to say my dog's name and couldn't even hear myself. Then just as quick, the aircon came back on, Netflix started playing again, and I could hear. It was the strangest thing ever. Anyway, This probably makes no sense, and I honestly can't even read it back. I feel like all the energy has been sucked out of me, and I need to sleep. If anyone has any insights, please let me know. Story 9. I keep remembering what I believe was a dream I had when I was young, around 6 years old at the time. I've been remembering it once every few months since then, now 22 years old. Most of my dreams start with me getting out of bed, and this is no different, but something is different about it in that I'm able to remember every detail of this specific dream and barely anything of my plenty of other dreams. So the dream goes like this. I wake up and a bright light is coming through my window. I pull the curtains aside a little and see the light is shining bright around my garden. I can't make out anything, but can see the light is coming from where the treehouse was. I look over to my brother, who is fast asleep. I look back at the window, and a figure is in the garden, silhouetted by the light, but proportions look way off for it to be human. I try to get my brother's attention, but I can't move to shake his feet. I look back out the window, and there's two massive eyes pressed up against the glass. I scream, but no noise comes out. I then woke up, in bed and not sweating. I usually wake up sweating buckets after a nightmare. The recurring part of it is weird as well, because I will also remember it randomly, not just when I'm sleeping. I'll be drinking a tea or sat in a lecture, and the whole dream play out in my head again. I also seem to wake up with a random cut or two, mostly healed the morning after I remember it. Story 10. Me and my family were heading towards a beach in San Diego, and we were driving down the freeway. I must have been about 15 or 16 when this happened, but I was listening to music and looking up at the clouds from the car window. Anyways, I suddenly noticed this weird triangular looking thing. Black object, really far up into the sky. Mind you, there were clouds in the sky that day, so it was a bit difficult for me to keep track of it as it was moving. At first I thought it was probably a plane because it's not very often that people see UFOs in the middle of the day. As I continued to watch it, I noticed how odd it was moving in the sky. It looked like the point of the part of the UFO was pointing downward toward the earth, and it was very slowly moving down closer to the ground. I was trying to convince myself that it was probably a plane, weather balloon, etc., but then I was like, planes usually don't fly downwards, right? As we continued to drive and the clouds were moving across the sky, I lost it for a minute or two and thought that was the end of it. I finally spotted it again and noticed that it was moving downward a bit quicker in the sky. It suddenly occurred to me to alert my family of this weird object in the clouds. However, before I got the chance to look away, the object stopped moving downward very abruptly, and all of a sudden it shot back into the sky almost at lightning speed, and I never saw it again. Afterwards, I was kind of frantically telling my siblings and parents of what I had just seen, and my father pointed out the small fleet of jets that suddenly shot across the sky in the direction of where I saw the UFO, which seemed quite weird to me at the time, but I didn't think much of it. But to this day, I still don't really know what it was that I saw. Story 11. It was Christmas 2002. We were celebrating at my grandmother's house, very rural area, not touched by city light pollution. There were at least 6 people in the room when all of a sudden a blue beam of light appears at the top of all 4 walls in the living room and scans its way down the entire room. We all saw this. Everyone stopped talking to watch it, and when it was over, it was a mystery. Everyone began discussing what we had just seen. Soon after this happens, a very bright white flash of light fills the room. Everyone sees this as well. We made sure no one had taken a photo, as it looked identical to a camera flash, but this was not the case. I've thought about this several times since it's happened, and have tried researching other similar experiences with very little results. I wonder if anyone can say that this happened to them as well. Story 12. I was around 12 years old, out for a walk with my friend in Newfoundland, Canada. The sun was starting to set. We started to walk towards a hiking trail that was pretty steep. Near the top of the trail, there was a huge rock, and something was sitting beside the rock. The way the sun was facing made it hard to pick out any details, but we saw its silhouette and knew that wasn't an animal or a human. It was either sitting or it had no legs and it was hunched over picking up something slowly in a weird movement. It's hard to describe. Its arms and body were super lanky and thin, and its head was super small, about half the size of a human head. My friend and I just stared at it for a minute, then it stopped what it was doing. It moved its head and stared at us. We both ran home as fast as we could. We didn't say a word to each other. We decided to draw what we both saw in different areas. We flipped the pages over and we both saw the exact same thing. If I was alone, I wouldn't have believed what I saw. But my friend saw the same thing, and many years later, we both remember that day. Story 13. I'll never forget summer before 7th grade. Sometime in July, Wednesday night, early Thursday morning. The evening before, my family had watched the old school show Unsolved Mysteries. I awoke in the night, lying on my right side, awake but my eyes still shut, completely silent. None of us ran fans back then to aid in sleep. I was awake and basically waiting to fall back to sleep again. However, I decided to open my eyes. On the right side of my bed, right there, was a being, seemingly fixated on a plush bear that I kept in bed with me. And this being fit all the descriptions I'd ever heard about or watched on television. Shorter, pale gray skin, and those awful eyes, huge, black, slanted, staring at my bear, right by my bed. Honestly, I cannot put into words how I felt right at that moment. I was only just about 12 at the time. At some point, I pulled my covers over my head and felt an awful rushing through my body of super warm, then cool, then warm again. Only later in my life did I understand that I was most likely feeling shock. I couldn't scream, felt frozen, too scared to scream maybe. What if I did scream? My mother and stepfather and 2 brothers would hear me. What the heck would they do if they came running into my room and saw this thing? What would it do? Is it going to kill me, abduct me? What if it already had and they were returning me? All these thoughts plus a million more just racing through my young mind. Awful just recounting all this and writing this story here. Again, how could I ever forget something traumatic like this? So being such a brave 11-year-old/12-year-old, and after what felt like 12 hours, I decided to try and scare it. I decided I would thrash my legs up and down from under my covers as hard as I could. I know, horrifying. I was so petrified though, so I did this, then remained under my covers just waiting. Nothing happened, so I stayed under my covers. This had to be at least close to being going on 2 hours from when I first opened my eyes and saw this thing. As I lay wide awake, I heard a noise. To this day, I still cannot explain exactly how it sounded. The sound felt as if it surrounded me and was coming from outside. It was a crisp, clean sounding sound, maybe mechanical, but maybe not, lasting only about 2 seconds. A sound that I definitely had never heard before and definitely had not heard since. As soon as I heard the sound, something in my mind told me, oh, they're gone. As crazy as it sounds, I firmly believe the sound was their transportation leaving. Needless to say, I didn't sleep the rest of the night or early in the morning. It took me so long to confide in my family about this terribly scary incident. Of course, they did not believe me. However, now, from time to time, my mother will mention it and suggest that maybe that's why I suffer from insomnia now. Very well could be. Story 14. 6 years ago, my boyfriend at the time, husband now, woke me up sweating and vibrating, in absolute fear. I asked him what was wrong and he began stuttering and telling me I would never believe him. He went on to tell me that he was woken up around midnight to this person standing at the end of the bed. My first thought was sleep paralysis, but he sat up and was ready to attack if he needed to. And in his head, he heard a voice that wasn't his, telling him it was okay, that they weren't there for ill reasons. He said he immediately felt calm from that. He also noted that he was shocked with how light a sleeper I am, that his movements didn't wake me. This being was unnaturally tall and actually had to crouch a little due to its height and us having been asleep in my basement. He said that this being reached out for a greeting and again began hearing a voice in his head saying hello. Nothing much else happened that night as my husband was frightened. All he remembered at the time was the last thing he heard from it in his mind was, "I'll see you again soon." And then he said it felt like as if time had started again, not realizing that it ever felt like it stopped until that point, and he was back in reality. That's when he woke me, feeling it had only been about 10-15 minutes when it had actually been over an hour. These visits continued for months, minimum once a week, max 3-4 times, but my husband got less and less frightened every time. This thing and him built a sort of friendship from what he explained to me. It had a name, but for the life of me I can't remember what it was. It answered any and every question my husband had, and I won't mention what those were, but after a while it just stopped, and he stopped waking me up in the middle of the night or telling me about it the next morning. But the times were always the same. He would be awoken around midnight, and they would have discussions about literally anything my husband had curiosities about, and he would come back to reality and time would unfreeze again between 1 a.m. and 1:30 a.m., having only felt like the encounter had lasted a short period of time. Once it stopped, I can't iterate just how much it meant it when it stopped. It was like for him it never happened. It's been 6 years, so I know this is choppy, but it's hard to remember everything with it having been so long ago now. I forgot about it for so long, and I don't know what prompted me to remember it about a week ago, but now I can't stop thinking about it and the oddness of it and how it just stopped so suddenly. And he's literally never made mention of it ever again, and I've never brought it up to him for this last week in fear that he may think I'm crazy, which I don't know why that's my fear, but part of me thinks if there's a chance he's completely forgotten it, whether it be on his own or something else, he may think I've gone insane. Anyways, this is long, so if you read the whole thing and have any ideas or similar stories, please let me know. I'll try to figure this out, as it's literally keeping me up at night. Story 15. This happened years ago, but I know it's real. On August 26, 2016, it was a normal night. I went to bed at 10 p.m. Awake around 1 a.m., half asleep, to see a gray human, aged 14 to 17, standing in my doorway. He tells me he crashed his or her ship nearby and needed to rest. I said fine and threw it a blanket from my top unused bunk and an extra pillow so it laid next to my bed to break the silence. I asked how far and where you're from. It answers telepathically, 32 light years, then pulled out some device like a radio from the 80s, and I hear the start of a broadcast. Good morning, galaxy, something. Soon I was getting yelling texts from my mom to be quiet and go to sleep. I turned to look at my phone, and it's 4 a.m., no texts, room is exactly as before, going to bed, and I think it's just a dream. Then look at my back door, a crack open, knowing it was shut, but not locked before going to bed. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed. Story 1. About 5 or 6 years ago, my boyfriend and I were hanging out with two acquaintances. One had several experiences with greys and other unexplainable stuff. I'll refer to him as E. The other guy was curious but haven't had any. My boyfriend had experiences too, one from which he shared with E. As for myself, I've heard stories, not just from them growing up, so this particular night, it's probably around 12:30 a.m., we were out driving around Pasadena, California, and my boyfriend mentions going to a place nearby that he and E knew about. E hesitates but agrees because he knew it was on private property. We park and have to walk up a really dark, curvy driveway, which is not even close to being safe because it's dirt and very narrow, and it goes up a hillside. If you drive up carelessly, you can literally roll your car down the ravine. Anyway, we make it to the top of the hill. Our intentions was just to find a place to sit and wait for something to happen. This particular area is known for a few people for occurrences. There is a house on the bluff overlooking the city. Behind the house, it drops onto a field. We didn't want to disturb anyone, so we walked down along a path that runs along the field out of sight of the house, and walked to the other side of the field and up some stairs. We are now on the opposite side of the house. There is a pool area that has a tall wooden fence around it. The gate is unlocked, so we go in. The pool is empty and there is junk all over. Clearly it hasn't been used in years, so we find some old chairs and sit and wait. This side looks over onto the forest, but if you go to the far left, you can see city lights in the distance. Looking across the forest is where we start to see a strange light coming out just above the tree line. It slowly moved back and forth, going down into the trees and coming up again. As this was happening, the light would change color. It went from a bright white to blue, then it would change to a dim red color. It just continued to do this. It was so weird. We sat for a little longer, and I remembered getting a feeling like we were being watched. Of course, I was a little paranoid because we were in a place that we shouldn't have been in the first place. There was a massive tree that sat on the bluff, like 50 feet from the house, at the far end of the pool. It caught my eye because it did the oddest thing, almost like something flew into the tree. It's kind of hard to explain, like it was alive. I don't know, just the way it was swaying, it was almost like a dance. I've never seen a large tree move like that, almost like it had intention. I know I saw it, but I didn't talk at all. None of us did. We just sat in silence and continued to observe our surroundings. I just couldn't stop looking at that tree. It was a calm night. The sky was clear, no sign of any storm. Nothing else was being blown around. It was just that tree that kept me intrigued. Well, after a while, we decided it was time to leave. The light in the distance stopped appearing. We walked in silence all the way back to the car. That's when we started talking about what we saw. Then E says, "So how about that tree?" We all saw it but didn't have any explanation for anything that night. I would like to go back there again, but I don't think it's a good idea. Story 2. I have 2 encounters. The first one happened roughly 10 years ago. My father, my 2 brothers, and me were on our back porch in Georgia. We lived in the country and literally had no neighbors for 2 miles in any direction. So we were out there. We were looking at the stars on a clear night, and we noticed a very bright star. After looking at it for a few minutes, it shot across the sky, stopped, shot straight up, stopped, then shot right again and stopped, and then went up diagonally and disappeared. Every time it shot across the sky, it was moving a good 5 to 6 inches, so in the sky it was moving easily hundreds of miles. I don't know if it was aliens or the government testing something, but it was amazing. The second encounter was my father, brother, and me driving down the road near our house. This happened 5 years ago. It was nighttime, and again we live in the middle of nowhere on backcountry roads. We saw in the mirrors, and by looking, a red rectangular light heading down the road from behind us, heading our way. It was going slightly faster than us. It passed overhead and was completely silent. We obviously stopped at this point, and it continues on down the road. Once the road ended, it went above the tree line and literally shot away at a high rate of speed in the sky. We never saw it again and could not make out what was causing the light. It was just a rectangular looking light coming from it. It was also much larger than the car, approximately the size of 2 school buses if they were welded together side by side. Any comments, please, would be greatly appreciated. Story 3. This happened a few months ago. So I work as a nurse and started a new job 45 minutes away at a nursing home that pays well and has the shift that I want. The shift I normally work is weekend doubles, evening and overnights, a 16-hour shift a day. But they needed me to work morning and evening this particular weekend, so I agreed, switching my sleeping schedule. The night shift nurse who came to relieve me was late Sunday night. I was behind on charting anyway, so I didn't get upset. I was given a report and heard a yelling resident on the floor. He said he fell. He was wearing warm socks that are not non-slip, sent to the ER due to his hip. More charting, state reportable if broken. Get out of work at 1 to 2 a.m., close to a 20-hour shift after a 17-hour shift the day before. I was dead on my feet, but I felt well enough to drive. My car is very tiny, I can't sleep in it, and my friend wouldn't answer the phone. The way I go home has a lot of twists and turns. I travel by the lake and love the water, so it helps me stay awake. I realize around here that I am not wearing my glasses, but I am too lazy to turn around to go get them. I only wear them to work and drive, but take them off to chart. I forget them a lot. I go past a small town, twists, turns, and woods, listen to my book to keep awake, about halfway home. At the next turn, there is a bright light, like a spotlight, coming through the woods. I continue on a little bit further, still in the wooden area and towards where the bright light is coming from. Bend in the road once more. On the side of the road where the night before I saw a hit deer was what looked to be a very thin man, skin-tight black clothes, kneeling over the deer that is still there, his back towards me. I thought he looked weird, but my glasses were gone, and my eyes are starting to blur a little. The spotlight was coming from the woods, pointing towards the man. I remember thinking about the light, thinking about how they got their vehicle through the woods, but again, I was dead. I try to pause my book, and my car slows down and nearly stopped. The man starts to move from the deer. I roll down my window and ask, "Is everything okay? Need any help?" Not really looking at him. I thought that maybe it was a different deer he'd hit. I'm about 15 to 20 or so feet in front of him. My car is stopped at this point. I'm still trying to get my book to stop. My touchscreen radio isn't working well, so I pick up my phone and stop my book. I really look towards the man after looking away from my phone, finally getting my book to stop, and realize that he or she really isn't a human. I freeze. It has stood up and faced me. The head is huge, like they describe aliens to be with huge eyes, except it is tall, not a tiny thing like they show on TV. It starts to walk towards my car. I can't breathe. I can't move. I felt like I couldn't even think. Everything just felt like it froze. I heard a voice, not mine, that sounded like it was just in my head say, "Sleep." I blink. It is gone along with the deer. I look at my clock, almost 4 a.m. My car is in park now, and I'm pulled over with no memory of doing so. My window is still down. I look at my phone, which is still in my hand, open it, and my book is still stopped in the same place. I try to call my sister, but she wouldn't answer, so I call my job. They answer. I just ask about my glasses and the resident. I eventually tell her I fell asleep and wanted to talk to someone so it doesn't happen again and everyone is asleep. They stayed on the phone until I got home. I don't think I fell asleep, but I pretend I did so I don't go insane. I haven't told anyone this. It scares me just thinking about it. If I did fall asleep, I could have hurt someone. If I didn't, then... Story 4. I had experiences for many years, from about 7, maybe even younger, to about 13 on a regular basis. The last very big experience was when I was about 20 or 21. I'm 35 now. The very last time something came right in my face and showed itself, and I told it I wasn't scared anymore, and it went away. Almost every night something would lift me out of bed. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm not lying, and it's true. I could hear my mom talking to things going on in the house, the creaks of the steps down the hall, but never once did anyone walk in when this was happening. I always thought if someone saw, they would think something was wrong with me. I was a kid at the time. I never saw a face. I would just say, put me down, over and over. I swear I remember touching the actual ceiling. It was not sleeping at all. When I did sleep, I could never sleep on my back, even to this day, because I would have extremely crazy nightmares. I had visions that were like something from a movie of what will happen in the future, like needing an ID to scan an entry to Walmart, for example, how batshit crazy our world looks years from now. Since I was about 7, I can remember this over and over. So I have seen many things I could share. Story 5. This happened to me back in 2013. I was 18 at the time. I was a healthy, normal woman by all accounts, and lived in a suburb of South Florida. Just at that juncture in my life, I was moving up north to UF, which is in Gainesville. Aside from the university, it's a very boring town. Mostly nothing up there. I had noticed that before moving there and during my time there, once a month, always on the same night, I think the first Sunday of every month, I wouldn't be able to sleep. Without fail, I couldn't sleep, and I would toss and turn all night. Sometimes after those nights, I would wake up with something strange on my body. Once, on my lower spine, right on the cord, I woke with a large red bump, perfectly centered. It wasn't itchy like a bug bite, and it was unlike a pimple. Another time, I awoke with a scar across my lower abdomen. It was long, and unlike a scratch, it was brown, like a cauterized scar, but it left my body within a day or two like a scratch might have. On one such Sunday, my boyfriend happened to be spending the night. It was my parents' rule that he would sleep in a separate room, but before he went off to his room, he laid next to me in my bed for a little while and we talked. He was saying something when suddenly he went quiet and looked behind him. I asked what was the matter, but he shrugged it off. He went to his room and we both tried to sleep. However, like usual on these nights, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep, a feeling of dread preventing me from sleeping. I got restless and decided to go sleep in the room with my boyfriend, hoping I might be able to relax with him there. But still I couldn't sleep, nearly dozing off only to awaken a fright, which was so uncharacteristic. I gave up and I went back to my own room until I suddenly gave in and fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, I told my boyfriend that I couldn't sleep all night. I felt like something was coming to get me. He told me at that moment the previous night, when he suddenly fell silent mid-conversation, he thought something was outside my window. He said for whatever reason, the first thing that came to his mind was aliens, and it froze him in fear. He also told me that shortly after I had returned to my room in the middle of the night, he was disturbed by a loud static noise, felt vibrations in the air. After a few months, this routine, once a month sleepless nights, stopped and never returned. I still don't know what it was all about, or if it was even anything, but that night put both of us on edge. Story 6. Okay, firstly, I'm a lucid dreamer. I can control my dreams and nightmares, but last night I had a dream that was no different than anything else from every night. I was working on the floor at my factory job and running the forklift like normal, until out of the bay door there were fireworks, more like a plume of light, like an explosion, coming from the other side of the valley. I live in the desert. We don't have valleys where I'm at. There are more details if asked, but this is the cut version. We decided to go out after seeing the lights fly away into the sky to the left of us. Once we get outside of the bay door, the ground is illuminated by it like a full moon times 10. We were now in the backyard of my childhood house. We look up to the sky, trying to find the light source, but it was a night sky. When we looked to the right, there was an ugly-looking and typical-looking alien. When it noticed us out, it screeched and jumped up and towards us, but dissolved into the brightening light. I woke up in a scream and couldn't sleep until daylight. My cat, who's pretty aware as well, stared at the wall behind me for a good 30 minutes. Now I can dream about scary stuff, and when it happens I can usually alter it to my advantage. This was different, and I haven't dreamed about aliens in over 10 years. What's this supposed to mean? Does it mean they come back? Story 7. This is my experience I would like to share with everyone about some of the encounters I remember having. It started when I was very young. My parents to this day remember me always screaming in the night for them to come to me. The first encounter I can remember was when I was a kid. I remember getting ready for my first day of school. At the time we were living on post at Fort Sam. I remember waking up at 5 a.m. to get dressed for school and heard this loud, strange humming noise coming from outside my window. When I opened the window, I saw this large silver UFO. I can remember this very vividly to this day. It was so large it covered the whole window. The only thing I could see of it was the silver aluminum from the ship. It had white lights on the top and these light blue lights at the bottom. It freaked me the hell out, and I slammed my blinds shut and screamed for my dad. When he came in, I told him what I saw. He laughed and opened the blinds, and nothing was there. From that day on, I had constant nightmares at night that felt realistic. I could never understand anything they said, but they could understand me. I remember in one dream, I would try and scream for help before they took me with them, and I would be paralyzed and unable to scream for help or get my parents' attention when they took me. They would put me on an examination table and just look at me as if they were studying me. They never did harm to me, but they just observed. I remember being in my early teens, still on having the same dreams. I finally built up the courage to speak with them. I remember the first time I was 12. They took me as usual, but this time I just let them take me. I had a strange, calm feeling this time. When they put me on the table, I asked them what exactly they were trying to do. The one alien told me they were trying to figure out how to make people live forever. They then asked if I felt safe. I told them yes, and asked if they would mind showing me around their ship. I don't remember many details, but the ones I do remember is seeing other people, humans, being examined. One was undergoing surgery. They then took me to a command center, which had a lot of big monitors with strange writings, and underneath the floor was like glass. You could see through it. I was so amazed because I could see Earth and it looked so beautiful. They could read my mind and tell I was pleased, and I told them that they were free to let me come with them as I wanted to learn more about them. For a while I would go back, and instead of being examined, they would take me around the ship, and I met a few different aliens, 3 to be exact. Their faces were slim, they were bright green in color, very skinny and long arms and legs. They wore nothing and they seemed to really grow on me. We started to have a friendship. I was able to start understanding what they were telling me clearly, but it wasn't speech, it was telepathic communication with me speaking out loud to them. One time they took me into a big green field was like a maze and not on Earth. Not sure where it was exactly, but it was a very peaceful. Nothing was there but hedges and fields of grass. We talked there 2 times, and the third time we talked there, they told me that they would now have to leave me alone for a while, and that I would only see them one last time after this. The last time I would encounter them was very, very strange. They picked me up at night, laying in bed, and this time I was back on the examination table. I saw one of my friends and I asked him what was going on. He told me not to be scared, but they wanted to test something on me, and if I was okay with it, they would be unable to see me ever again. I was very sad and told them I didn't want to lose them, as we were very close. He told me that this was very important to them, and they could really use my help, that it could change the future of their research. I agreed. I was 14 at the time. Sorry I didn't say that earlier, but this went on for some years before this point. Then another alien, I don't know, had me follow him to this pod. It was egg-shaped silver and had bright red lights around it, and had a chair inside with the glass that would cover it open. As I sat in the chair, I was scared. There were large, sharp objects hanging from inside, looked like drills and saws. I asked him for my friend, and 2 of my friends showed up. They held my hand and promised me I would be safe. The other friend behind him reassured me his words, and then the other alien had a long needle in his hand. It was about the size of a large medicine syringe with a at least 2-inch long needle, and there was neon green fluid inside the syringe. I asked if it was going to hurt, and they told me yes, it would, but to remember that I was helping them. I asked them what it was, and they said they wouldn't tell me. So I was ready, and they could tell, and they injected the fluid into my left arm. It hurt a lot. I was crying, and they could tell I was in pain, but shortly after it subsided, I noticed 3 big green fluid-filled blisters on my arm, and then they told me what they had injected into me was the serum that would make you live for eternity. They told me that I should not tell anyone what they did because it was a very secret. My 2 friends gave me a last hug goodbye, and the one that gave me the shot waved goodbye as they sent me back home. When I woke up in bed, I rolled over and I looked at my arm, and I am not lying, there were the 3 green welts on my arm. When I put my finger on it, it popped green fluid on my bed sheets. I popped all 3, and I was kind of scared. I yelled for my dad. He ran in and saw my arm and rushed me to the ER. I didn't want to tell the doctor what happened out of fear of them thinking I was crazy, so I just said that I had no idea what happened. I woke up and had green welts on my arm and popped them. The doctors took samples and prescribed me some chemical burn cream to put on them. I still have 3 circular scars on my left arm, and they are very faint now, but they stayed visible for years. I always wanted to share this, but I have no idea why they were so nice to me and chose me for the experiment. I never saw them after that. Everything stopped. No contact, nothing. Just thought it was strange. I miss them too. I wish them well and would like to think maybe I did something to help mankind in the future and was glad I could help them. Story 8. Okay, so basically when I was in probably 5th grade, I was staying up watching YouTube on my iPad, and I decided I should probably go to get to sleep. I think it was either 1:30 or 11:30, I can't remember, but I do remember laying in bed and suddenly hearing something. It sounded like the little hovercraft things with blades on them in the movie Incredibles. But yeah, I heard that, and I froze and just sat there not knowing what to do. So I climbed out of bed and looked out the window and saw this little light moving in the sky. Then it stopped for a minute. Then after a bit it kept moving forward, but there was a little light that kept flashing random colors, from red to yellow to green to blue and then back to red again. I know this is going to sound weird, but it was hypnotizing to watch. Not only did it change colors, but it changed shape too. After every flash of color, it would change its shape. Then the next morning, when we woke up, no BS, our satellite was gone. There wasn't any storms the night before or any strong winds at all. It's just gone. Story 9. So let's just get this straight before I tell you the story. My dad is stubborn, no BS type of old guy. He thinks aliens and ghosts, etc. are all a load of crap, and he wouldn't make something like this up. So basically here it goes. We're from England and we live in the Midlands, and one night during the late 80s, my dad and his friend are out making hay in the tractor in a field when all of a sudden a bright flash of light appears right in front of them, and there is a giant ship hovering in front of them. He's always ever told me it looks just like you'd imagine a spaceship, disc-shaped with lights spinning around the edge. Him and his friends had only just taken in what they were seeing before it darted off in the opposite direction towards the next village. So my dad gets on the CB radio, because you know if you didn't have one of those in the 80s, then who even were you? And he radios another farmer friend in that village, and he sees it too. He even radios his wife, who then wakes up his kid, and they see it too before it darts away into the night. I always remember my dad telling me this story when I was a kid, and although out of character for him to do, I just thought it was a cool story he made up. But a couple of years ago, his friend comes over, the one who was in the tractor with him, and just happened to mention it, and his friend remembers instantly and begins to describe it exactly how my dad did, which really makes me believe it was true. My dad still doesn't believe in aliens. He believes it was a spacecraft made by the government to spy on us, and they made it look like a typical alien spaceship so people wouldn't think it was the government. God knows. All I know is I believe it happened, and it's cool as hell. Story 10. When I was about 8, I had what I believed to be an alien encounter. I used to live in the deep country in McKinney, Virginia. The only thing I remember doing was I woke up with my pants and underwear off and walked downstairs because I felt incredibly thirsty. I walked into the doorway of the living room from upstairs and just stood there. My older brother told me to go put some pants on. I ignored him and went into the kitchen. I went to get some water out of my fridge. I look out the window and I see this huge thing with lights rotating. I scream, I drop my cup and yell for my brother, who comes and looks out the window and told me it was just a reflection off the window, but it wasn't because I never saw that again. He tells me he doesn't remember this, but I do. I also had a strange fear of aliens since I was 3, and my parents never spoke to or introduced me to the concept. Another strange encounter I had at the time at the same house was I woke up in the middle of the night. I used to sleep next to my younger brother because I was always scared of being alone as a child, and I turned. I saw an alien and it says, "Greetings, orders." I laid flat and stared at the ceiling and couldn't scream. Only air came out with no sound. Can anyone please debunk this for me? I've looked into sleep paralysis and strange dreams, but ever since these 2 experiences, I haven't had any more. Story 11. While on vacation in Japan last year, I stayed at an Airbnb near the Dago Shrine in Kyoto, Japan. On my last night in town, I come back to my Airbnb about 11:40 p.m. on a Monday night. Mind you, I had no alcohol or drugs in my system when this happened, and I was wide awake. The walkway to the shrine you have to walk through to and from the Airbnb was about 3 city blocks long by 2 blocks going both sides. As the layout goes, there were ditches at the foot of the walls followed by a row of plants alternating all the way down. Then the walkway in the middle, with a museum on the right, a whole shrine, palace at the fork. I walk into the walkway of the shrine and I ask myself this question: why is there 2 kids hopping a wall? As I see these 2 little figures hop the wall to my right, I pause and watch what's happening. As they both get down, they run across the path and run all the way to the end of the path by the fork and wait there. I was walking single file, and they stand there for a few minutes. I walk a little closer, because that was the way to the Airbnb. I make eye contact with these things. They were about 3 or 4 feet tall, very slim but proportionate, but with a bigger head and pointed ears, as white as snow. Their eyes were as big as our eye sockets, but black. Normally you can tell if someone is wearing clothes in a small distance. I was about 15-20 yards from them, but they had no sign of clothes. After making eye contact, both of them go running behind the corner I had to turn. You could also see their shadows on the corner behind them, but I slowed down to give these things space because I was freaked out a little at this point. And as I turned the corner, they were gone. As I'm walking back to my Airbnb, I sensed I was being followed, but I couldn't hear or see anything. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoy.